I didn't see the car as something strange at first. Out on a forgotten rural back road after midnight, you get used to odd shapes on the shoulder. Ditched trucks, rusted farm equipment, junk someone couldn't be bothered to haul away. Most of the time, you just keep your hands on the wheel and drive. But some details don't fit the usual picture, and your brain notices before you do. I was an hour or so into the long stretch between two small towns, the kind of distance where if something went wrong, help would be whoever happened to pass by. My phone had been flipping between one bar and no service for the last 30 miles. The road was narrow and dark, no streetlights, just my headlights pushing out a pale tunnel into the trees. The trees pressed in close, old, tall branches caught over the road like fingers. Beyond the reach of my beams, they turned into a wall of black. There were no houses, no driveways, no mailboxes. Just asphalt, forest, and the low hum of my engine. Then my lights caught the shape of a car on the shoulder ahead of me. It was angled slightly toward the ditch, like maybe the driver had drifted and corrected too late. No hazard lights, no tail lights, no interior glow. Just a dark sedan sitting in the wrong place at the wrong time. I eased off the gas out of habit. I've had enough breakdowns in my life to know what it feels like when everyone else treats you like scenery. As I got closer, my headlights washed over the back, then the roof, then the windshield. That's when the first detail bothered me. The wipers were moving. They swept slowly across the glass in a steady rhythm, back, forth, back again, with that tired rubber sound you only hear when they're working harder than they should. But the glass itself was dry. The rain that had passed through earlier in the night was long gone. The highway was bone dry. There was nothing for the wipers to clear away. My eyes tracked the path of the wipers, then dropped to the interior. The driver's seat was empty. No silhouette, no slumped shape, no head at the wheel. The passenger seat was empty too. From what I could see, the back seat didn't hold anyone either. And yet the engine was running. I could hear the faint purr as I rolled past. Exhaust curled up in a thin line from the back. A car left running in the middle of nowhere, wipers sweeping a dry windshield. No driver. It didn't make sense in a way that my brain didn't like. I pulled over about 30 yards ahead, leaving myself space. My wheels crunched onto the gravel edge, and I put the car in park. The thought of just driving on flickered through my mind, but it felt wrong to leave it like that. You don't want to be the person who ignores something that obvious and then hears about a body on the news the next day. The second I shut off my engine, the world went quiet in a way that felt heavy. No other cars. No distant highway noise. The wind moved through the tops of the trees, but down at road level, it was strangely still. Behind me, through the rear glass, I could see the faint stutter of movement as those wipers kept dragging across the empty windshield. I stepped out and shut my door gently. The air was cool and smelled like wet dirt and old leaves. Gravel shifted under my boots as I walked a few steps into the lane. "Hello?" I called out. "You okay?" My voice carried farther than I expected, disappearing into the trees without an echo. No answer. I tried again, a little louder. "Hey, you need help?" Nothing. The car sat where I'd first seen it, dark and wrong and quietly alive. The wipers kept moving. The exhaust kept drifting. It looked like the driver had just stepped away for a second and somehow never stepped back. I walked a bit closer but stopped well short of the rear bumper. There's a line your instincts draw sometimes, and you learn not to cross it just to prove you're reasonable. Maybe they'd gone into the trees to use the bathroom. Maybe they'd walked down the road to get better reception. Maybe a friend had picked them up and they'd forgotten to kill the engine in their rush to leave. None of those explanations fit right, but they were better than the feeling growing quietly in the back of my skull. The longer I stood there, the more the night felt packed. Like the dark wasn't empty at all, just full of things that weren't moving yet. That's when I heard it. A faint sound from the tree line on the opposite side of the road. Not loud, not close. Just a small, deliberate shift. Something brushing against branches, something stepping on leaves. A broken rhythm of crackle, pause, pause. that didn't follow the wind. I turned and stared into the forest. My headlights didn't reach that far. Past the edge of the asphalt, the ground dropped off and the trees took over, a thick mess of trunks and undergrowth. I couldn't see anything, but the noise came again, a little clearer, a soft, uneven trudging sound that had weight behind it. Someone was out there, walking where no one ought to be walking at that hour, with no light, no voice, and no reason I could understand. My brain started asking fast, practical questions. Why would anyone leave a running car on the side of a rural road and go into the woods at night? How long had they been watching the road? Every part of me that wanted to be helpful, that wanted to do the decent thing and make sure someone wasn't hurt, got pushed aside by something older and sharper. You can call it fear if you want. To me, it felt closer to recognition, like I had stepped into a story that wasn't meant for me and still had a chance to step back out. I moved toward my car without turning my back on the tree line. My pulse thudded in my throat. My keys felt clumsy for a second before the familiar shapes lined up. Unlock, open, in, lock. I slid behind the wheel, locked the doors, and started the engine in one motion. Headlights flared across the road, restoring my tunnel of visibility. The forest on either side remained a wall of darkness. The car behind me still sat exactly where it had, wipers moving, exhaust curling. But I couldn't shake the sense that something about the scene had shifted while I was standing outside. Not visibly, not obviously, just shifted. I pulled forward. As the distance between us grew, some stubborn part of me still wanted to know how this ended. Who was in those trees, what they were doing, whether they were coming back. At the bend in the road, when I was seconds away from losing sight of the car entirely, I glanced up at the rearview mirror. That's when I saw him. A figure stepped out from the tree line on the passenger side of the road, exactly where the sound had come from. He didn't stumble or rush, he just walked, steady, unhurried, like he was returning to a parked car in a grocery store lot. He crossed the shoulder, moved behind my retreating car, and went straight to the driver's door of the idling sedan. He opened it, got in, and pulled the door shut in one smooth motion. For a second, his silhouette was framed cleanly in my mirror. Not huge, not small. Just an average man who had apparently been walking in the woods in total darkness while his car sat running on the roadside. The sedan's headlights came on. The wipers kept moving. The car pulled out onto the road. I faced forward again and set my jaw. I wasn't speeding, but I wasn't interested in finding out how quickly that car could close the gap either. On that kind of road, surrounded by that kind of dark, you learn a simple rule. Do not stop unless you have no other choice. I kept my focus on the twin beams cutting into the black ahead of me. The trees rose and fell around each bend. Every so often the road curved just enough that my mirrors caught the pale suggestion of light behind me, but I didn't linger on it. I held my speed. I held my line. I counted off the miles in my head. Eventually, the forest began to thin. A distant orange glow appeared on the horizon, the kind of light small towns leak into the sky. My phone flickered from no service back to one bar, then two. It was only when I saw the first gas station sign, washed-out red letters promising fuel and coffee, that I realized my shoulders were locked so tight they hurt. I pulled into the station and parked under the brightest canopy, right next to the doors. When I finally looked back down the road, there was nothing there. No headlights, no moving shapes, just an empty strip of highway slowly being reclaimed by the quiet. Inside, the fluorescent lights felt too harsh. The smell of burnt coffee and cleaning supplies hit me all at once. I stood at the counter with a paper cup in my hand, replaying the whole thing in my head in pieces. A running car, wipers on a dry windshield, an empty interior, a man stepping out of the trees like he'd only stepped away for a minute. There was nothing obviously supernatural about it. No glowing eyes, no vanishing figures, no impossible angles. Just a pattern of details that didn't add up, stacked too neatly to feel innocent. The clerk rang up my coffee and made small talk about the hour and the weather. I almost asked him if he'd heard of any strange activity on the road. A theft ring, maybe, or people staging breakdowns. The words felt flimsy in my mouth, so I swallowed them and just nodded along. Later at home, with full daylight laying everything bare, the whole thing felt even more unreal. Houses appeared again. Mailboxes leaned along the shoulder. Dogs barked behind fences. By noon, my memory of that stretch of road felt like something that had happened to someone else in a different life. But the feeling didn't go away. It wasn't fear exactly. It was more like I'd almost stepped somewhere I wasn't supposed to, and something small and quiet in me had pulled me back at the last possible second. Sometimes I try to explain it to myself in simple terms: a stranger, a bad situation, and me getting lucky. But every version I come up with leaves something out, like the silence, or the timing, or the way he moved, as if nothing about that night surprised him at all. I don't stop for cars on that stretch anymore. If I see a vehicle pulled over there now, I keep going and make the call when I reach somewhere with lights and people and cameras. Maybe that's cowardly. Maybe it's cautious. I'm old enough now that I don't feel much need to prove which one it is. Not every situation needs you to be a hero. Sometimes that prickling feeling at the back of your neck, the one that tells you something about this moment, is wrong in a way you can't name. That's not paranoia. That's the part of you that has quietly kept you alive up to this point, asking you for once to choose yourself over the story you might tell later. So if you ever find yourself on a dark road, alone, and you see a car sitting on the shoulder with its wipers sweeping a bone-dry windshield, engine humming, interior empty, no sign of a driver anywhere, remember this: some cars are parked because someone needs help. And some are parked because something was waiting for you to pull over. I saw enough that night to know which kind I'd rather pass by. If you want more stories from out here, you can subscribe. And thank you for giving me the chance to tell you another one.